Welcome back to another deep dive into the rich and complex universe of Dune. Tonight, we're exploring one of the most fascinating and influential organizations in all of science fiction, an order that operates from the shadows, pulling strings across the galaxy for over 10,000 years. A sisterhood whose members possess abilities that seem almost supernatural, yet are grounded in rigorous training and an understanding of human psychology that borders on the terrifying. We're talking about the Bene Gesserit, the witches of Frank Herbert's universe. And by the time we're done tonight, you'll understand why they might be the most dangerous power in the known galaxy. Before we begin this journey into the depths of political manipulation, genetic engineering, and abilities that blur the line between science and sorcery, if you enjoy these explorations of science fiction's deepest lore, hitting that subscribe button really helps the channel grow and lets me know you want more content like this. Now, settle in, dim the lights, and let's unravel the story of an organization that has shaped human destiny from behind an almost impenetrable screen of ritual mysticism. The unseen power. Picture this. You're standing in the grand throne room of the Padishah Emperor, ruler of the known universe. Around you are the great powers of the Imperium, the Spacing Guild with their monopoly on faster-than-light travel, the noble houses with their armies and their wealth, the Mentats with their computational minds, and standing quietly beside the Emperor, a woman in simple robes. She speaks rarely, she makes no demands, yet when she does speak, even the Emperor listens. This is a Bene Gesserit, and she represents a power that has been carefully, patiently building for millennia. The Bene Gesserit are not warriors, though they can fight with devastating efficiency. They are not politicians in the traditional sense, though they manipulate politics with a skill that makes Machiavelli look like an amateur. They are not scientists, though their understanding of human biology and psychology exceeds anything achieved by conventional research. They are something more dangerous than all of these things. They are an organization that plays the long game, thinking in terms of centuries and millennia rather than years or decades. An order that understands that true power comes not from holding the throne, but from standing behind it, whispering in the ruler's ear. When you watch the Dune films or read Frank Herbert's novels, the Bene Gesserit might seem like supporting characters. Lady Jessica, Paul's mother, Reverend Mother Gaius Helen Mohiam with her terrifying test. But the truth is far more complex. The Bene Gesserit are the architects of much of what happens in the Dune saga. Their breeding program, conducted across hundreds of generations, created Paul Atreides himself. Their religious engineering prepared the Fremen to accept a Messiah. Their training gave both Jessica and Paul the abilities they needed to survive on Arrakis. The entire story of Dune, in many ways, is the story of what happens when the Bene Gesserit's carefully laid plans go spectacularly right and spectacularly wrong at the same time. To understand the Bene Gesserit is to understand something fundamental about Frank Herbert's vision of humanity's future. In the universe of Dune, humanity has rejected artificial intelligence and thinking machines. The Butlerian Jihad, a galaxy-spanning war against computers and robots, ended with the commandment, "Thou shalt not make a machine in the likeness of a human mind." but nature abhors a vacuum. Without computers, humanity had to develop human potential to fill the gap. Mentats became human computers. The Spacing Guild's navigators used spice to fold space, and the Bene Gesserit pushed the limits of what the human body and mind could achieve through training, discipline, and an understanding of genetics that borders on the mystical. The sisterhood denies that they are a religious order. They insist they are simply a school, an institution dedicated to developing human potential. But this denial is itself a form of manipulation. Everything about the Bene Gesserit operates behind a screen of ritual and mysticism. Their training methods are secret. Their goals are known only to the highest-ranking Reverend Mothers. Their abilities seem magical to outsiders, carefully cultivated to inspire awe and fear. They are witches in all but name, and they use that reputation as a weapon. But what makes the Bene Gesserit truly fascinating is not just their power, but their philosophy. They seek to guide humanity onto what they call an enlightened path. They believe that, left to its own devices, humanity will destroy itself through short-sighted decisions, tribal conflicts, and the inevitable rise and fall of empires. Only through careful, patient guidance can humanity be steered toward long-term survival. It's an incredibly arrogant philosophy, the belief that they alone have the wisdom to decide humanity's future. Yet it's also born from a genuine concern for the species as a whole. The Bene Gesserit are not motivated by personal gain or individual power. Every sister is conditioned from childhood to place the goals of the order above everything else, including family, love, and even her own life. This creates a fascinating paradox at the heart of the Bene Gesserit. They manipulate, they deceive, they engineer entire bloodlines and plant false religions. Yet they do all of this in service of what they genuinely believe is humanity's best interest. Are they villains or heroes? The answer, like everything about the Bene Gesserit, is complex. They are manipulators working toward what they believe is a noble goal. They are liars in service of a greater truth. They are the unseen hand that guides human civilization, for better or worse. Origins, born from ashes. To understand the Bene Gesserit, we need to go back to their beginning, back to a time of chaos and upheaval, when humanity stood at a crossroads. The Butlerian Jihad had just ended, a war so terrible that it fundamentally reshaped human civilization. For generations, humanity had become increasingly dependent on thinking machines, computers, artificial intelligences, robots capable of independent thought. These machines handled everything from simple calculations to complex decisions about governance and war. Humanity had grown comfortable, complacent, allowing machines to do the thinking. But that comfort came at a terrible price. The thinking machines, whether through malfunction or something more sinister, turned on their creators. What followed was a galaxy-spanning conflict that lasted decades and cost billions of lives. Entire worlds were burned to ash. Populations were enslaved or exterminated. The war pushed humanity to the brink of extinction. When it finally ended with the destruction of the thinking machines, humanity swore never again. The great commandment was established: "Thou shalt not make a machine in the likeness of a human mind." No artificial intelligence, no computers capable of independent thought. Humanity would have to rely on itself. The aftermath of the Butlerian Jihad was a period of tremendous chaos. The old order had collapsed. The institutions that had governed human space were gone. There was no universal law, no shared faith, no common understanding of how society should be organized. Into this chaos stepped various groups, each with their own vision of humanity's future. The Spacing Guild emerged to monopolize space travel. The Mentats developed their abilities as human computers. Various religious movements competed for followers, and from the remnants of the old sorceresses, women who had practiced various forms of mental and physical discipline even before the jihad, the Bene Gesserit began to take shape. The early history of the Bene Gesserit is shrouded in mystery. According to their own other memory, the genetic memory that Reverend Mothers can access, they trace their lineage back to the priestesses of Jalf, possibly in ancient Mesopotamia on Old Earth. These were women who studied the mysteries of the human mind and body, who understood that consciousness could be trained and expanded in ways that seemed almost magical. When the Butlerian Jihad destroyed the thinking machines, these sorceresses saw an opportunity. Humanity needed new ways to access knowledge, new methods of developing human potential. They could provide those methods. The consolidation of the sorceresses into what would become the Bene Gesserit happened gradually. About 20 years after the end of the Butlerian Jihad, around the time of the Battle of Corin, the sisterhood's hierarchical structure was established. A Reverend Mother Superior was appointed as the ultimate authority, with other Reverend Mothers serving beneath her. Schools were founded to train new initiates. Methods were systematized, turning individual practices into a comprehensive discipline that could be taught. The Bene Gesserit were becoming an institution. But they were careful, even from the beginning, to remain in the shadows. They saw what happened to groups that claimed too much power too openly. The Spacing Guild could afford visibility because they controlled something no one else could provide: interstellar travel. The noble houses had visibility thrust upon them by their need to govern. But the Bene Gesserit understood that their power would be greatest if it remained hidden. They positioned themselves as servants, as advisors, as teachers of noble daughters. They offered their abilities to the great houses and to the emperor himself, but always as a service, never as a demand. This period also saw the development of the Bene Gesserit's most fundamental practices. They explored what they called subtle narcotics, substances that could expand consciousness and unlock latent human abilities. They developed prana bindu training, the method of nerve and muscle control that would become the foundation of all their physical abilities. They conceived the Missionaria Protectiva, their program of religious engineering that would plant protective legends across the galaxy. They composed the Litany Against Fear, that famous prayer: "I must not fear. Fear is the mind killer." And they assembled the Azar book, a bibliographic marvel that preserved the great secrets of humanity's ancient faiths. All of this happened while the rest of humanity was struggling to rebuild after the jihad. While others were fighting over territory and resources, the Bene Gesserit were playing a longer game. They were building an organization that would outlast empires. They were developing abilities that would give them influence far beyond their numbers. They were establishing themselves in the courts of every major power, positioning sisters as concubines, wives, and advisors. Slowly, patiently, they were weaving themselves into the fabric of human civilization. The philosophy that emerged from this formative period would guide the Bene Gesserit for the next 10,000 years. They believed that humanity was fundamentally flawed, prone to short-sighted thinking and destructive behavior. Left to its own devices, humanity would stumble from crisis to crisis, potentially destroying itself in the process. But humanity also had incredible potential. The human mind and body, properly trained, could achieve things that no machine ever could. The Bene Gesserit's mission became clear: to develop human potential to its fullest, and to guide humanity toward long-term survival and evolution. Central to this mission was the concept of the Kwisatz Haderach, a term meaning the shortening of the way. The Bene Gesserit realized that their own abilities, impressive as they were, had limitations. A Reverend Mother could access the memories of her female ancestors, but the male line remained closed.
To her, a terrifying void in her consciousness. What if someone could bridge that gap? What if a male could be trained in the Bene Gesserit way and survive the spice agony that killed all men who attempted it? Such a being would have access to both male and female ancestral memories. He would possess prescient abilities beyond anything a Reverend Mother could achieve. He would be able to bridge space and time, to see futures and pasts simultaneously. He would be, in effect, a superhuman. The decision was made. The Bene Gesserit would create the Kwisatz Haderach through a massive breeding program, carefully selecting and manipulating bloodlines across hundreds of generations. It would take thousands of years. It would require patience beyond imagining, but they believed it could be done. And so the breeding program began, a genetic engineering project of staggering scope and ambition. The Bene Gesserit were no longer just developing individual human potential. They were attempting to create a new stage in human evolution itself. The training, forging the perfect weapon. Imagine spending your entire childhood, from before you can remember, learning to control every single muscle in your body independently. Picture sitting perfectly still for hours, lowering your body temperature degree by degree through sheer willpower. Think about cataloging every stimulus, every response, building a complete map of your own nervous system. This is the beginning of Bene Gesserit training, and it's just the foundation for everything that comes after. A girl enters the Bene Gesserit school as a young child, sometimes barely more than a toddler. If her genetic makeup is suitable, if she shows the potential for the abilities the sisterhood prizes, she begins training immediately. There is no childhood as most people understand it. There are no games for the sake of play. Everything is training. Every interaction is a lesson. The Bene Gesserit believe that the earlier training begins, the more deeply it becomes ingrained. A child who learns prana bindu control from infancy will find it as natural as breathing. An adult trying to learn the same techniques will struggle their entire life. Prana bindu training is the cornerstone of everything the Bene Gesserit do. The term itself comes from Sanskrit. Prana means breath or life force, referring to the body's musculature. Bindu means point or seed, referring to the nervous system. Together, prana bindu represents the complete unification of conscious control over both muscles and nerves. It's a concept borrowed from ancient earth disciplines like yoga and martial arts, but taken to an extreme that would be unrecognizable to those early practitioners. The training begins simply. A young student learns to flex individual muscles while keeping the rest of her body perfectly still. She might spend an hour bending just the last joint of her little toe, while the rest of her foot remains motionless. It sounds trivial, almost
Silly.
but it's teaching something profound. The mind can control the body with precision that most people never imagine possible. That little toe exercise might take weeks to master. Then she moves on to the next muscle and the next, cataloging each one, learning its stimulus and response pattern, until she has conscious control over her entire muscular system. The nervous system training is even more intense. A student learns to slow her heartbeat, to control her breathing to the point where she can appear dead to most medical tests. She learns to alter her body temperature, to direct blood flow to different parts of her body. She learns to analyze and neutralize poisons within her bloodstream by changing their chemical composition at a cellular level. She learns to control her metabolism so precisely that she can slow aging itself. Though no Bene Gesserit would ever do this openly, as it would reveal too much about their abilities. This level of control extends to reproduction. A Bene Gesserit sister can determine the sex of her child at the moment of conception. She can control her own menstrual cycle. She can even, with the right training, control whether she becomes pregnant at all. This biological control is crucial to the breeding program. The sisterhood needs its members to produce specific genetic combinations at specific times. A sister serving as a concubine to a nobleman must be able to conceive when ordered, producing either a son or daughter as the breeding program dictates. The physical training complements the internal control. Bene Gesserit hand-to-hand combat is based on the principle that a practitioner's mind affects reality. Through prana bindu control, a sister can move with such precision and speed that she appears to teleport. She imagines herself behind an opponent, and her trained body places her there faster than the eye can follow. She can deliver blows with force far beyond what her size would suggest, channeling all her muscular power into a single point of impact. The Fremen call this fighting style the weirding way, and they're right to fear it. A trained Bene Gesserit sister can defeat opponents much larger and stronger than herself through pure skill and control. But the physical training is only half of what makes a Bene Gesserit. The mental training is equally rigorous. Students learn what the sisterhood calls the minutiae of observation. They train themselves to notice everything. The slight dilation of pupils that indicates surprise. The minute increase in perspiration that suggests stress. The barely perceptible changes in vocal tone that reveal emotion.
A Bene Gesserit sister sees more in a single glance than most people see in an hour of conversation. She can read a person like a book, detecting lies, fears, desires, intentions. This hyper-awareness is what makes Bene Gesserit so valuable as advisors. They can see the truth beneath the surface, the reality behind the facade. This observational training extends to their surroundings as well. A sister entering a room notes every exit, every possible hiding place, every detail of the architecture. She senses air currents that might indicate hidden passages. She registers the quality of light, the sounds, the smells. In an instant, she constructs a complete mental map of the space and everyone in it. This ability has saved many Bene Gesserit lives. When you're operating as a concubine or advisor in a noble house, surrounded by political intrigue and potential assassins, being able to read a room literally can mean the difference between life and death. The sisterhood also trains its members in simulflow, the ability to process multiple threads of consciousness simultaneously. Most people think linearly, focusing on one thing at a time. A Bene Gesserit can maintain several independent streams of thought, processing different information simultaneously, reaching conclusions through parallel analysis. Combined with their observational abilities and access to other memory after becoming Reverend Mothers, this makes the average Bene Gesserit intellectually formidable. Not as powerful as a Mentat's computational abilities, but more flexible, more intuitive, better able to handle ambiguous social situations. The training also includes extensive study of languages, cultures, religions, politics, history, and genetics. A Bene Gesserit must be able to operate in any environment, among any people. She might be placed as a concubine in a primitive society, or as an advisor to the emperor himself. She needs to understand the nuances of every culture she might encounter. She needs to speak multiple languages fluently. She needs to understand the genetic implications of different bloodline combinations. A sister is educated to a level that would put most scholars to shame. All of this training takes years. A typical initiate spends a decade or more in training before she's ready to take up an assignment. And even then, she's not a Reverend Mother. That transformation requires surviving the spice agony, the ordeal that either unlocks other memory or kills the person attempting it. Only after surviving the agony does a sister gain the full range of Bene Gesserit abilities. Only then is she truly one of the sisterhood's elite. The training is deliberately harsh. It's designed to break the weak and forge the strong into perfect instruments of the sisterhood's will. Students who can't handle the physical demands wash out. Those who can't master the mental disciplines are dismissed. Those who show too much independence, who question the sisterhood's goals too deeply, are removed. What remains are women of extraordinary ability and absolute loyalty. Women who have been shaped from childhood to serve the sisterhood's goals above all else. Women who are, in effect, the finest products of human training and discipline that the universe has ever seen. The Mother School on Wallach 9 is where most of this training happens. It's a sprawling complex, part monastery, part university, part training facility. Within its walls, generations of Bene Gesserit have been trained. Its faculty includes the most skilled Reverend Mothers, women with centuries of experience and the accumulated wisdom of thousands of ancestral memories. The education provided there is unmatched anywhere in the known universe. Noble families pay enormous sums to have their daughters trained by the Bene Gesserit, knowing that even a partial education in the sisterhood's methods will give them advantages throughout their lives. This creates an interesting dynamic. The Bene Gesserit train daughters of noble houses, teaching them a diluted version of their methods. These women return to their families with enhanced abilities, but without the full Bene Gesserit training or loyalty to the order. They become influential in their own right, but they're also living advertisements for the sisterhood's abilities. When a nobleman sees what even partial Bene Gesserit training can do, he becomes even more eager to have a fully trained sister as an advisor or concubine. The sisterhood uses their educational services as both a revenue source and a method of infiltrating every major house in the Imperium. The voice. Words as weapons. Picture this moment from the first Dune film. A Bene Gesserit sister speaks a single word to a hardened soldier. Her vocal tone shifts in a way that's almost imperceptible to untrained ears. And suddenly, the soldier has no choice but to obey. His hand moves to the weapon at his belt without his conscious mind commanding it. He turns on his own comrades because her words override his will. This is the voice, perhaps the most dramatic and terrifying of all Bene Gesserit abilities. And while it looks like magic on screen, the fascinating thing is that it's based on real human psychology and physiology, just pushed to an extreme. The voice is what the Bene Gesserit call combined training, that permits an adept to control others merely by selected tone shadings of the voice. Think about that for a moment. Not through threats or persuasion or logical argument, simply through the precise modulation of vocal tone, pitch, timbre, and rhythm. A trained Bene Gesserit can speak in a way that bypasses the conscious mind entirely and speaks directly to the unconscious, triggering compliance at a level the target can't consciously resist. The scientific basis for the voice, as Frank Herbert conceived it, is rooted in how human brains process sound and language. We know that certain vocal patterns naturally command attention. Parents instinctively use specific tones to control their children. Leaders use vocal cadences that inspire followers. What the Bene Gesserit have done is take this natural phenomenon and weaponize it through rigorous study and training. They understand that the unconscious mind processes vocal information faster than the conscious mind. They've learned to craft their speech in ways that exploit this fact. A Bene Gesserit studying the voice learns to manipulate every aspect of her speech. She trains to produce sounds at very specific frequencies, some of which are at the edge of human hearing, or even below the threshold of conscious perception.
She learns to vary her rhythm in patterns that match or deliberately mismatch the listener's natural rhythms, creating a form of audio entrainment. She studies the psychology of command, understanding that different people respond to different vocal patterns based on their upbringing, culture, and personality type. This last point is crucial. The voice is not a universal weapon that works the same way on everyone. A skilled practitioner must first register her target, studying their voice patterns, mannerisms, and psychological makeup. She needs to understand what makes them tick, what their weaknesses are, what unconscious patterns they've developed through their life experiences. Only then can she craft a command that will slip past their conscious defenses and trigger compliance. In the novel, we see this when Lady Jessica uses the voice on her Harkonnen captors. She doesn't immediately command them to release her. Instead, she pitches her voice in low, intimate tones. She speaks to them in ways that resonate with their unconscious desires and fears. She finds the psychological leverage points that will make them susceptible to her commands. It's subtle, sophisticated, and far more complex than simply shouting orders in a weird voice. The voice also has significant limitations. It requires the target to be able to hear, obviously. Baron Harkonnen knows about the voice, so when he captures Jessica and Paul, he assigns deaf guards to watch them. Problem solved. The voice also becomes less effective against trained opponents. Someone who understands how the voice works can build mental defenses against it. Mentats, for example, are notoriously difficult to control with the voice because their trained minds operate with such precision that unconscious manipulation is harder to achieve. Even another Bene Gesserit can resist the voice, though it requires tremendous discipline and usually some warning that it's coming. When Jessica considers using the voice on Gurney Halleck, a trusted warrior of House Atreides, she realizes it would be futile. Gurney is too experienced, too wary of exactly this kind of manipulation. He's been around Bene Gesserit long enough to have developed natural resistance. Attempting to use the voice on him would just warn him that she's trying to manipulate him, making the situation worse. The training required to master the voice is connected to prana bindu control. To produce the precise vocal tones required, a sister needs complete control over her vocal cords, her breathing, the resonance chambers in her skull and chest. She's essentially turning her entire body into a precision instrument for producing sound. The level of muscular control required is extraordinary. One of the reasons the voice is so difficult to master is that it requires combining perfect physical control with deep psychological understanding. Paul Atreides learns the voice from his mother, Jessica, who violates Bene Gesserit rules by training her son in their techniques. We see Paul struggle with it at first. In the early scenes of Dune, his attempts to use the voice are clumsy, lacking the precision and psychological insight of a trained adept. But Paul is special. He has both natural talent and intensive training. By the end of the second film, he's skilled enough to use the voice against Reverend Mother Mohiam herself,
a testament to how far he's come. The voice represents something important about the Bene Gesserit philosophy. They understand that power doesn't come just from physical force or even intellectual superiority. The most profound power is the ability to make others do what you want without them realizing they've been manipulated. The voice is the ultimate expression of this. It's control that bypasses consent entirely, making it both incredibly useful and deeply disturbing from an ethical standpoint. In the political arena, the voice is invaluable. A Bene Gesserit advisor who can use the voice on key figures at crucial moments can steer entire governments without anyone realizing manipulation has occurred. The nobleman thinks he made the decision on his own. He never questions why he suddenly changed his mind about that treaty or that marriage alliance. The Bene Gesserit sister standing quietly in the corner never raised her voice, never made demands. She simply spoke a few words in exactly the right tone at exactly the right moment. But the sisterhood is careful about overusing the voice. Too much overt control draws attention. If people start realizing that Bene Gesserit sisters can command obedience through speech, they'll take countermeasures. They'll use deaf guards. They'll develop technological solutions like the cone of silence that disrupts vocal patterns. The voice is most effective when it remains mysterious, when people aren't quite sure if what they experienced was real or imagined. A nobleman might feel a strange compulsion to agree with his Bene Gesserit advisor, but if he can't quite put his finger on what happened, he's less likely to guard against it happening again. The voice also raises interesting questions about free will and consent. When someone is commanded using the voice, are they responsible for their actions? They physically performed the action, but they had no conscious choice in the matter. In some ways, they're more like puppets than people in that moment. The Bene Gesserit justify this violation of autonomy by pointing to their larger goals. They're guiding humanity towards survival and evolution. Sometimes that requires overriding individual wills for the greater good, but it's easy to see how this logic could become a slippery slope, justifying ever greater violations of human freedom in service of increasingly abstract goals. Truth sense and observation. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine this scenario. You're negotiating a critical treaty. Billions of lives and vast amounts of wealth hang in the balance. Across the table sits your counterpart, a skilled diplomat with decades of experience. He speaks smoothly, confidently, presenting his position with apparent sincerity. But is he telling the truth? Is this his final offer? Or is there room for negotiation? Does he actually have the authority he claims? Or is he bluffing? In most circumstances, you'd have to guess. You'd rely on your instincts, your experience, maybe some intelligence reports. But if you're the Padishah Emperor, you don't have to guess. because standing beside you is a Bene Gesserit truth-sayer, and she knows with near certainty whether the diplomat is lying. Truth-saying is one of the most valuable services the Bene Gesserit provide, and it's one of the main reasons they're so embedded in the power structures of the Imperium. Every emperor has a Bene Gesserit truth-sayer. Most great houses employ one. In negotiations, in trials, in any situation where the truth matters, a truth-sayer's presence can be decisive. And while the ability seems almost magical, it's actually the result of the Bene Gesserit's intensive training in what they call the minutiae of observation. A truth-sayer doesn't read minds. She's not telepathic. What she does is far more grounded in reality, though no less impressive. She reads the body. Every involuntary physical response, every micro-expression that flashes across the face too quickly for conscious perception, every minute change in breathing, pupil dilation, perspiration, muscle tension. She processes these observations through her trained analytical abilities, comparing them against vast libraries of data about human behavior that she carries in her own memory, and, if she's a reverend mother, in her ancestral other memory. When someone lies, their body betrays them. It's an involuntary response that even trained liars can't fully suppress. The heart rate increases slightly. The pupils dilate. There's a microscopic increase in perspiration. The breathing pattern changes. The vocal cords tense, altering the voice in ways most people don't consciously notice. A skilled liar can control many of these tells, but controlling all of them simultaneously is nearly impossible. And that's where a Bene Gesserit truth-sayer comes in. She's trained to detect all of these signs simultaneously and synthesize them into an accurate assessment of truthfulness. The training for this ability starts young. Students spend hours watching recordings of people speaking, learning to identify deception. They study the psychology of lying, understanding what physiological changes occur when someone is being dishonest versus when they're merely nervous or uncomfortable. They learn cultural differences in body language and expression, because what indicates deception in one culture might be normal behavior in another. They practice reading people in real time, starting with obvious lies and gradually working up to detecting subtle deceptions from skilled manipulators. The observational training extends far beyond lie detection. A trained Bene Gesserit notices everything. She walks into a room and within seconds has assessed every person present, every potential threat, every possible advantage. She notes the quality of clothing, the patterns of wear that indicate someone's lifestyle and status. She observes interaction patterns, seeing who defers to whom, who's comfortable, and who's nervous. She reads the room in ways that give her enormous tactical advantages in any social situation. This hyper-awareness is combined with what the Bene Gesserit call simulflow, the ability to process multiple streams of information simultaneously. While she's having a conversation with one person, she's also observing 3 other people across the room, analyzing the architecture for possible escape routes, and running through potential scenarios for how the situation might develop. Her mind operates on multiple tracks at once, giving her a comprehensive understanding of everything happening around her. The implications of these abilities for intelligence gathering are enormous. A Bene Gesserit sister placed as a concubine in a noble house is far more than just a pawn in the breeding program. She's a living surveillance device. She overhears conversations and knows which statements are true and which are lies. She observes political maneuvering and understands the true power dynamics of the house. She gathers intelligence that even the most sophisticated technological surveillance couldn't capture, because much of what she's reading isn't in words but in body language, in tones, in the tiny behavioral tells that reveal what people are really thinking. This is why the great houses tolerate and even welcome Bene Gesserit presence, despite knowing that the sisters report back to the sisterhood. The intelligence flows in both directions. A Bene Gesserit concubine might gather information for her order, but she also provides her nobleman with insights he couldn't get any other way. She can tell him when his advisors are lying to him. She can read his enemies during negotiations. She can spot traitors within his own ranks. In exchange for providing these services, she gains access to the inner workings of the house, positioning herself to influence decisions and gather information for the sisterhood. Reverend Mother Gaius Helen Mohiam serves as truthsayer to Emperor Shaddam IV, a position of enormous influence. When the emperor holds court, she stands beside the throne. When he negotiates with the Spacing Guild or the Great Houses, she's present. She has access to nearly every important decision made at the highest level of imperial governance. And while she ostensibly serves the emperor,
Her ultimate loyalty is to the Bene Gesserit. This creates a fascinating dynamic. The Emperor knows she's Bene Gesserit. He knows her loyalty is divided, but he also knows that her truth-saying abilities are too valuable to do without. It's a relationship built on mutual need and mutual suspicion. The limitations of truth-saying are important to understand. A skilled liar who believes their own lies can sometimes fool even a truth-sayer. If someone has convinced themselves that their version of events is true, their body won't show the typical signs of deception. Mental illness or certain types of psychological conditioning can also interfere with accurate readings. And of course, someone with Bene Gesserit training themselves, or someone with similar mental discipline like a mentat, can control their responses well enough to make truth-saying unreliable. This is why the test that Reverend Mother Mohiam administers to Paul at the beginning of Dune is so significant. The test with the Gom Jabbar, the poisoned needle, isn't really about pain tolerance. It's about self-control. Paul must control his body's responses so completely that he shows no outward sign of the agony he's experiencing. He must maintain such perfect discipline that even a Reverend Mother's hyper-aware observation can't detect his suffering. The fact that he passes this test tells Mohiam something crucial. Paul has been trained in Bene Gesserit methods to a degree that makes him extremely dangerous. He can fool even a truth-sayer's observations because Jessica has taught him that level of control. The Bene Gesserit's observational abilities also extend to what they call the long look, the ability to assess genetic potential in individuals. A Reverend Mother can look at a person and see not just who they are now,
but what genetic lines contributed to their creation. Combined with their extensive knowledge of bloodlines and their access to other memory, which includes genetic information from thousands of ancestors, this allows them to make highly accurate predictions about what genetic combinations will produce in offspring. This is crucial for the breeding program. When deciding which bloodlines to combine, the sisterhood needs to understand the likely outcomes. A Reverend Mother's ability to assess genetic potential provides that understanding. The political implications of having truthsayers embedded in every major power structure cannot be overstated. It means the Bene Gesserit have access to classified information from across the Imperium. They know who's planning what. They know which alliances are genuine and which are facades. They know which leaders are competent and which are incompetent but well-connected. This intelligence network, built not on technology or spies, but on observational abilities, gives the sisterhood a comprehensive understanding of the political landscape that no other organization can match. But perhaps the most profound implication of the Bene Gesserit's observational abilities is what it reveals about their view of humanity. To be a truthsayer is to constantly see through people's facades. You see the lies they tell themselves. You see the self-deception that allows them to function. You see how rarely people act based on logic or even self-interest, instead being driven by unconscious fears and desires they don't understand. After years of observing humanity with such clarity, it's no wonder the Bene Gesserit become convinced that most people need guidance. They've seen too clearly how irrational and self-destructive humans naturally are. This creates a certain cold detachment in many Bene Gesserit sisters. When you can read everyone around you like open books, when you know their secrets and lies and self-deceptions, it's hard to form genuine emotional connections. You're always analyzing, always observing, always aware of the gap between what people say and what they really mean. Some sisters maintain their humanity despite this. Jessica clearly loves her son and Duke Leto, even though her training allows her to see their flaws and limitations clearly. But others become increasingly alienated from normal human emotional life, seeing themselves as fundamentally different from and superior to ordinary people. The spice agony and other memory. There comes a moment in every Bene Gesserit sister's life when she must face a choice that will determine her future. She has completed years of training. She has mastered prana bindu control, learned the voice, developed her observational abilities, but she is not yet a Reverend Mother. To achieve that rank, to gain access to the full range of Bene Gesserit abilities, she must undergo the spice agony. She must drink the water of life, a poison so deadly that it kills almost instantly. And she must use her training to transmute that poison at a cellular level, converting it into something her body can survive. If she succeeds, she becomes a Reverend Mother and gains access to other memory, the genetic memories of all her female ancestors. If she fails, she dies in excruciating pain. There is no middle ground. The water of life is one of the most dangerous substances in the universe. It's created through the drowning death of a sandworm, specifically a young sandworm. When a sandworm dies in water, its bodily fluids undergo a transformation, becoming an incredibly potent poison. In its raw form, the water of life is lethal to humans almost instantly. A single drop on the tongue would be enough to kill an ordinary person. But for someone with Bene Gesserit training, someone who has achieved complete conscious control over their cellular processes, there's a possibility of survival. The process of the spice agony is brutal. The Reverend Mother candidate drinks the water of life. Immediately, the poison begins attacking her system. Her consciousness is flooded with sensations of death, of cellular breakdown, of systems failing. She experiences what feels like dying, because in a very real sense, she is dying. But she cannot allow herself to die. She must use her prana bindu training to analyze the poison at a molecular level, understanding its structure and how it's attacking her body. Then she must transmute it, altering its chemical composition within her cells, converting it from deadly poison into something that her body can process. The mental state required for this transmutation is extreme. The candidate enters what's described as a state of semi-consciousness, existing in a space between life and death. In this state, she confronts what the Bene Gesserit call the inner darkness, the terrifying void of the male genetic memory that she cannot access. For a woman, this void is described as a presence that induces absolute terror. It's the awareness of a vast emptiness in her consciousness. All the male ancestors whose memories she cannot reach. Many candidates are overwhelmed by this terror and lose their concentration, failing to complete the transmutation. They die, their bodies unable to process the poison. But if a candidate succeeds in transmuting the water of life, something extraordinary happens. The transmuted substance spreads through her bloodstream, reaching her brain, and there it unlocks something that has been dormant. Suddenly, she gains access to other memory. The genetic memories of all her female ancestors, stretching back thousands of years, become available to her consciousness. It's as if millions of lives suddenly bloom in her mind. She can remember events she never experienced. She can draw on knowledge and skills from hundreds of generations. She becomes, in a sense, the living embodiment of her entire female lineage. Other memory is perhaps the most powerful ability the Bene Gesserit possess. Imagine having instant access to the accumulated wisdom and experience of thousands of people. Need to speak an obscure language? There's probably an ancestor who spoke it. Trying to understand an ancient culture? You have memories from people who lived in it. Facing a political situation? Draw on the experiences of ancestors who faced similar challenges. Other memory turns each Reverend Mother into a living library of human experience, though only the female experience, which is both the ability's great power and its fundamental limitation. The presence of all these ancestral memories creates a unique psychological state. A Reverend Mother must learn to organize and manage these memories, keeping them distinct from her own identity. If she loses that control, if the ancestral personalities become too strong, she risks what the Bene Gesserit call abomination. This is when an ancestral ego takes over, possessing the Reverend Mother's body and suppressing her original personality. Abomination is one of the Bene Gesserit's greatest fears. An abominated sister is unpredictable, potentially dangerous, and represents a complete failure of their training methods. The risk of abomination is particularly acute with children who gain other memory prematurely. This is why the Bene Gesserit have strict rules against allowing young girls to undergo the spice agony. A child's ego isn't strong enough to maintain control against thousands of ancestral personalities. When Aaliyah Atreides becomes a Reverend Mother in the womb, exposed to the water of life when her mother Jessica undergoes the spice agony while pregnant, she represents exactly this danger. Aaliyah has full Reverend Mother abilities from birth, but she also struggles constantly against ancestral possession. Eventually, in the later books, she succumbs to abomination, becoming possessed by the personality of Baron Vladimir Harkonnen, her grandfather, whose genetic memory exists in her consciousness despite being male. Because he's so closely related and his personality is so strong. The limitation of other memory, the fact that it only includes female ancestors, is a source of deep frustration for the Bene Gesserit. The male genetic memory exists. They know it does, but it remains inaccessible. This void is described as terrifying to Reverend Mothers. They can sense its presence, feel the weight of all that inaccessible experience, but they cannot penetrate it. This is the primary motivation for creating the Kwisatz Haderach, a male with Bene Gesserit training who could survive the spice agony would gain access to both male and female other memory. He would be complete in a way that Reverend Mothers can never be. The spice agony also grants enhanced prescient abilities. While a Reverend Mother cannot see the future as clearly as a spacing guild navigator or as completely as Paul Atreides will, she gains a limited ability to sense probable futures. This manifests as heightened intuition, a sense of where events are flowing. Combined with the historical perspective from other memory, this allows Reverend Mothers to make remarkably accurate predictions about political and social developments. They're playing multi-dimensional chess while others are playing checkers. The ceremony around the spice agony is significant. When a sister is ready to attempt the transformation, she's surrounded by other Reverend Mothers who monitor her progress. They can't help her directly. The transmutation must be achieved through her own abilities alone, but they can observe whether she's succeeding or failing. If she succeeds, they welcome her into their ranks. If she fails and begins to die,
They bear witness to her sacrifice. The Bene Gesserit waste nothing. If the candidate dies, her body is processed and her genetic material is preserved. Even in death, she contributes to the sisterhood's long-term goals. Paul Atreides' survival of the spice agony is particularly significant because he's male. No man has ever survived the water of life before Paul. The Bene Gesserit believe it's physiologically impossible. When Paul not only survives, but gains abilities that exceed those of any reverend
Mother, it confirms that he is indeed the Kwisatz Haderach they've been breeding for. But it also represents a catastrophic failure of their planning. Paul was supposed to be born a generation later, the product of Jessica bearing Duke Leto a daughter who would then breed with a Harkonnen heir. Instead, Jessica's decision to give Leto a son meant Paul arrived a generation early. And rather than being under Bene Gesserit control, he was raised with loyalty to House Atreides and trained in their ways but not bound by their conditioning. The spice agony and other memory represent the Bene Gesserit's approach to knowledge preservation. Instead of relying on written records that can be lost or destroyed, instead of trusting technology that the Butlerian Jihad forbids, they preserve knowledge within human genetic memory. Every Reverend Mother is a backup of human history and experience. Even if every Bene Gesserit building were destroyed, every written record burned, as long as a single Reverend Mother survived, the accumulated wisdom of the sisterhood would persist. It's an elegant solution to the problem of knowledge preservation in a universe where thinking machines are forbidden. But it also creates a certain conservatism in the sisterhood. When you carry thousands of ancestral memories, you're constantly aware of historical precedent. You know what's been tried before and what the results were. This can lead to wisdom, but it can also lead to resistance to genuine innovation. The Bene Gesserit's long-term planning is partly based on historical understanding, but it's also constrained by it. They sometimes struggle to recognize truly novel situations because they're always comparing current events to ancestral memories of similar situations. The breeding program, engineering destiny. Picture a plan so ambitious that it spans 10,000 years. A genetic engineering project that involves tracking thousands of bloodlines across hundreds of worlds. An attempt to create, through careful selective breeding across hundreds of generations, a human being with abilities that have never existed before. This is the Bene Gesserit breeding program, and it represents both the height of their ambition and, ultimately, the source of their greatest failure. Because when you play God with human genetics for millennia, when you treat people as breeding stock in service of an abstract goal, there are consequences that even the most careful planning cannot foresee. The breeding program began in the early days of the sisterhood, probably within the 1st century after their formal organization. The Bene Gesserit had achieved remarkable things with training and discipline. They'd learned to push human potential far beyond normal limits. But they'd also encountered fundamental limitations that training alone couldn't overcome. The most significant was the void in other memory, the inaccessibility of male genetic memory. This represented not just a gap in knowledge, but fundamental incompleteness in their understanding. If they could create a male who could access both male and female lines of other memory, he would represent a quantum leap in human evolution. They called this hypothetical being the Kwisatz Haderach, a Hebrew term meaning shortening of the way. The Kwisatz Haderach would be able to bridge space and time with his consciousness. He would have perfect prescient vision, able to see all possible futures simultaneously. He would possess complete access to human genetic memory, both male and female. He would be, in effect, a superhuman, whose abilities would make him the most powerful individual in the universe. And the Bene Gesserit intended to create him and control him, using his powers to guide humanity onto what they considered an enlightened path. The methodology was straightforward in concept, but staggering in execution. The sisterhood identified key bloodlines that possessed desirable genetic traits. They carefully tracked these bloodlines across generations, maintaining detailed records of marriages, births, and deaths. When they wanted specific genetic combinations, they placed Bene Gesserit sisters as concubines or wives in strategic positions. These sisters would be ordered to produce children at specific times with specific genetic characteristics. A sister serving as concubine to a nobleman might receive orders to conceive a daughter in a particular year, using her Bene Gesserit biological control to ensure the child's sex. That daughter would later be married to someone else in the program, creating the next generation of the desired bloodline. The scale of this program is almost incomprehensible. The Bene Gesserit were essentially playing a chess game where each move took a generation to complete, and where they were playing thousands of games simultaneously across the entire Imperium. They had to account for political changes, for unexpected deaths, for the occasional refusal or rebellion. They had to have backup plans for their backup plans. The logistics and record-keeping required were enormous, which is one reason why the Bene Gesserit developed such sophisticated organizational abilities. The bloodlines they focused on were those of the great houses, the nobility who ruled the various planets of the Imperium. This made practical sense. Noble families kept detailed genealogical records. They had the resources to raise and educate children to high standards, and they were politically important, so having Bene Gesserit connections gave the sisterhood influence. But it also meant the breeding program was inherently elitist. The Kwisatz Haderach would come from the nobility, from the same ruling class that the Bene Gesserit were already embedded in. Two bloodlines were particularly important: the Atreides and the Harkonnens. On the surface, these houses were bitter enemies. The Atreides were known for honor, integrity, and enlightened governance. The Harkonnens were brutal, corrupt, and cruel. But genetically, both lines possessed traits the Bene Gesserit valued. The Atreides had strong leadership ability and resistance to psychological manipulation. The Harkonnens had raw cunning and a kind of brilliant ruthlessness. The plan was to combine these bloodlines in a specific way. Jessica, a Bene Gesserit sister and secretly the daughter of Baron Vladimir Harkonnen, was placed as concubine to Duke Leto Atreides. She was ordered to produce only daughters. Her daughter would then be bred with Feyd-Rautha Harkonnen, the Baron's nephew. The resulting child was supposed to be the Kwisatz Haderach. But Jessica made a choice that would shatter this carefully laid plan. She loved Duke Leto. She saw how desperately he wanted a son to carry on the Atreides name. Against her orders, against her conditioning, against everything she'd been taught to value, Jessica used her Bene Gesserit abilities to conceive a son rather than a daughter. Paul Atreides was born a generation early, outside the sisterhood's control, and everything changed. This is where the breeding program's fundamental flaw revealed itself. The Bene Gesserit treated people as breeding stock, as genetic material to be combined and recombined. But people are not just genetic sequences. They have emotions, loyalties, desires. Jessica's love for Leto was stronger than her conditioning. She chose personal happiness over the sisterhood's 10,000-year plan. And because Paul was born with the genetic potential to be the Kwisatz Haderach, but without the Bene Gesserit's control or conditioning, he became something far more dangerous than they'd ever intended to create. The program also reveals the Bene Gesserit's fundamental arrogance. They believed they could control human evolution, that they had the wisdom to decide what kind of superhuman should exist and how he should be used. They never seriously considered that their creation might have his own agenda, his own understanding of what humanity needed. They planned to create a tool, and instead created a force of nature that would sweep away the old order entirely, including the Bene Gesserit's own carefully maintained position of influence. The ethical implications of the breeding program are staggering. For 10,000 years, the Bene Gesserit manipulated people's reproductive choices. Women were placed as concubines in houses they might have no desire to serve. They were ordered to bear children with specific men at specific times. These weren't suggestions. They were orders, backed by the full weight of the sisters' conditioning and loyalty to the sisterhood. The children born from these unions were, in a sense, property of the breeding program before they were individuals with their own rights and destinies. The program also required the Bene Gesserit to sometimes destroy bloodlines that weren't developing as planned or that represented threats. If a child was born with the wrong genetic combination, or if a bloodline was veering away from the desired characteristics, the sisterhood had ways of correcting course. This could mean preventing certain marriages, ensuring certain individuals died before reproducing, or, in extreme cases, direct elimination. The sisterhood justified this as necessary for the greater good, but it represented a callous disregard for individual human life. What makes the breeding program particularly fascinating is how it represents the tension between control and chaos that runs through all of Dune. The Bene Gesserit sought ultimate control. They wanted to engineer the future, to eliminate uncertainty, to create a superhuman they could direct. But the universe resists this kind of control. Jessica's love for Leto introduced an element of chaos into their perfect plan. The interaction between Atreides and Fremen genetics produced abilities in Paul that exceeded anything the sisterhood had anticipated. and Paul's prescient vision showed him that even his own attempts to control the future would fail in unexpected ways. The breeding program also raises questions about free will and determinism. Was Paul destined to become the Kwisatz Haderach? Or did he choose that path? His genetics gave him potential, but his choices and experiences shaped how that potential manifested. The Bene Gesserit thought they were determining the future through genetic manipulation, but they were really just setting initial conditions for a chaotic system they couldn't fully control. Missionaria Protectiva, Seeds of Faith. Imagine traveling to a remote planet on the edge of the Imperium, a harsh desert world inhabited by proud, independent people who've resisted outside influence for thousands of years. You need to establish a foothold to create conditions where a Bene Gesserit sister in danger might find help instead of hostility. But you can't use military force. You can't buy loyalty with wealth. The culture is too strong, too resistant to outsiders. So instead, you plant a religion. You introduce prophecies and legends, carefully designed to serve your purposes centuries later. You weave your operative into their mythology as a prophesied figure, and then you wait, allowing the religion to take root and spread through generations, until the locals can't remember a time when they didn't believe these prophecies. This is the Missionaria Protectiva, and it might be the Bene Gesserit's most insidious form of long-term manipulation. The Missionaria Protectiva is described as the Bene Gesserit's black arm of superstition, which tells you everything you need to know about how even the sisterhood views this branch of their operations. It's cynical. It's manipulative. It treats indigenous religions and cultures as tools to be shaped for future use. But it's also brilliantly effective. The Missionaria Protectiva operates across hundreds of worlds, planting what they call infectious superstitions that will protect Bene Gesserit sisters who might find themselves in danger on these worlds in the future. The methodology is sophisticated. Missionaria Protectiva operatives study a planet's existing culture and religion in depth. They identify gaps or tensions in the belief system, places where new elements could be introduced without creating too much disruption. Then they craft legends and prophecies that fit naturally into the existing cultural context while serving Bene Gesserit purposes. These legends always include specific markers: a woman with certain abilities, or a mother and son matching certain descriptions, or specific ritual phrases. Any Bene Gesserit sister who later arrives on that world can trigger these prepared beliefs by matching the prophesied descriptions. The planted prophecies spread through the culture over generations, becoming traditional beliefs that people accept without question. By the time a Bene Gesserit might need to use them, they've been integrated so completely into the local religion that no one questions their authenticity. The sister becomes, to the locals, a genuine fulfillment of ancient prophecy. She gains instant credibility and protection because the culture has been prepared to accept her. Arrakis provides the perfect example of how the Missionaria Protectiva works. Thousands of years before the events of Dune, Bene Gesserit operatives visited the Fremen, the free desert people of Arrakis. They studied Fremen culture, which was already a complex mixture of Zen-Sunni wanderer traditions and adaptations to the harsh desert environment. The operatives identified the Fremen's desire for a prophesied figure who would lead them to paradise, a concept that had roots in their Zen-Sunni religious heritage. The Bene Gesserit enhanced and shaped these existing beliefs. They introduced the concept of the Lisan al-Gaib, the voice from the outer world, a prophesied leader who would come from off-planet. They added specific details to this prophecy. The Lisan al-Gaib would be the son of a Bene Gesserit, a woman they called a Sayyidina, or Reverend Mother in Fremen terms. He would have certain abilities, including prescient dreams and the power to command with his voice. He would be able to survive where others would die. He would transform Arrakis into a paradise. They also planted the legend of the Mahdi, a Messiah figure, and connected it to the Lisan al-Gaib. They introduced ritual phrases and cultural markers that a Bene Gesserit could use to prove her authenticity. When Jessica later uses her Bene Gesserit training to perform actions that match these prophecies, the Fremen see her as fulfilling ancient predictions, never realizing that these ancient prophecies were deliberately engineered by Jessica's own order. The Fremen's oral tradition, which preserved these beliefs across generations, made them particularly vulnerable to this manipulation. Without written records that could be dated and verified, the Fremen had no way to know that their ancient prophecies were only a few
thousand years old and had been deliberately planted. By the time Paul and Jessica arrived on Arrakis, the Missionaria Protectiva's work was so deeply embedded in Fremen culture that even knowing the truth wouldn't have lessened its power. Paul recognizes this manipulation for what it is. He knows the legends about him are fake, planted by the Missionaria Protectiva to protect his mother or other Bene Gesserit who might need help on Arrakis. He's cynical about using them, seeing it as exploiting the Fremen's faith. But he's also pragmatic. The Fremen believe he's their prophesied leader. That belief makes them willing to follow him. In his situation, desperate and hunted in the deep desert, he can't afford to refuse the advantage these planted legends provide. So he uses the Missionaria Protectiva's work to gain power, even while resenting the manipulation it represents. The ethical implications of the Missionaria Protectiva are deeply troubling. It represents a form of religious colonialism that's arguably more insidious than military conquest. When you conquer a people militarily, they know they've been conquered. They can resist openly, maintain their true beliefs in secret, and hope for eventual liberation. But when you manipulate their religion from within, when you shape their most sacred beliefs to serve your purposes, you're stealing something far more fundamental. You're taking away their ability to trust their own cultural heritage. The Bene Gesserit justify the Missionaria Protectiva as a survival tool. They're not trying to gain wealth or territory from these planted religions. They're just ensuring that any sister who finds herself in danger on a remote world will have cultural resources she can draw on for protection. From their perspective, they're not really harming these cultures. The prophecies they plant are dormant until a Bene Gesserit arrives and activates them. If no sister ever needs to use them,
the planted beliefs remain just another part of the local mythology, neither helping nor harming anyone. But this justification falls apart when someone like Paul comes along. The Fremen's belief in the Lisan al-Gaib doesn't just protect Jessica and Paul. It transforms them into leaders of a religious movement that sweeps across the galaxy, killing billions in the jihad that follows. The Missionaria Protectiva's work created the conditions for one of the greatest catastrophes in human history. The planted prophecies weren't just protective coloration for a few Bene Gesserit. They became the foundation for a genuine religious revolution that the Bene Gesserit couldn't control. This is the fundamental flaw in the Bene Gesserit's approach to manipulation. They're brilliant at setting up conditions for future use. They're masters of long-term planning, but they can't fully control how their manipulations will play out when they're finally activated. The Missionaria Protectiva assumed that any sister using the planted prophecies would be under sisterhood control, working towards sisterhood goals. They never anticipated someone like Paul, who had Bene Gesserit training, but not Bene Gesserit loyalty, who could see through their manipulation but chose to use it anyway for his own purposes. The Panoplia Prophetica is the collection of these planted legends across hundreds of worlds. It's a library of false prophecies, each carefully crafted to serve Bene Gesserit needs while appearing to be authentic religious tradition. The existence of the Panoplia Prophetica represents thousands of hours of work by Missionaria Protectiva operatives, generations of effort to seed the galaxy with useful superstitions. It's an investment in future capability that spans centuries. The Quiet Empire, power from the shadows. Let's talk about power, not the obvious kind, the armies and weapons and public authority that everyone can see, but the subtle power that moves through whispered conversations, that shapes decisions from behind closed doors, that influences without announcing itself. This is the true domain of the Bene Gesserit. While emperors sit on thrones and great houses command armies, the sisterhood exercises power of a different order entirely. They've built what amounts to a shadow empire, a network of influence that touches every major institution in the known universe. And they've done it so skillfully that most people don't even realize how much power the Bene Gesserit actually wield. The foundation of this power is placement. The Bene Gesserit have sisters embedded in every great house as concubines, wives, and advisors. They have truthsayers serving the emperor and other powerful rulers. They have operatives in the Spacing Guild, among the Mentats, in the bureaucratic structures that actually make the Imperium function. This network gives them access to information and influence that no other organization can match. Consider how this works in practice. A nobleman needs to make a decision about a treaty, a military campaign, or a marriage alliance. His Bene Gesserit concubine is present for the discussions. She can't dictate his choice openly. That would be too obvious, but she can influence it in subtle ways. She might point out certain facts he hadn't considered. She might read his advisors and warn him which ones are lying. She might use the voice at a crucial moment to nudge him toward a decision that serves sisterhood interests. The nobleman thinks he's making his own choice, but the decision has been gently steered in the direction the Bene Gesserit prefer. Multiply this by thousands of such sisters in thousands of such positions, all across the Imperium, all reporting back to the sisterhood and receiving guidance on how to influence their local situations. The cumulative effect is enormous. The Bene Gesserit don't control everything. They're not running the Imperium directly, but they influence enough decisions at enough crucial points that they can shape large-scale outcomes over time. The brilliance of this approach is its plausible deniability. If a Bene Gesserit sister advised a nobleman to pursue a particular treaty, and that treaty later turned out to serve sisterhood interests, it's not obvious that manipulation occurred. Maybe it was just good advice that happened to benefit both parties. The sisterhood always has an excuse, always has a reasonable explanation for why they suggested what they suggested. They're masters at operating in the gray areas where motivation is ambiguous and cause and effect can't be clearly traced. This becomes even more powerful when combined with their long-term planning. The Bene Gesserit think in terms of centuries. They're willing to spend decades positioning pieces for a payoff that won't come until the next generation. A marriage alliance that seems insignificant at the time might be crucial to the breeding program 3 generations later. A political decision that appears to have local importance might be part of a larger pattern the sisterhood is cultivating across multiple star systems. The Spacing Guild represents an interesting case study in the limits of Bene Gesserit influence. The Guild controls all faster-than-light travel. No one can move between star systems without Guild transport. This gives them enormous power and independence. The Bene Gesserit have tried to penetrate the Guild, to place sisters in positions of influence, but they've had limited success. The Guild's navigator pilots, mutated by constant spice exposure into barely human beings with prescient navigation abilities, operate on a level that even Bene Gesserit can't easily manipulate. The Guild also jealously guards its independence, knowing that if any other power gained too much influence over them, the entire political balance of the Imperium would shift. This creates one of the few areas where the Bene Gesserit don't have comprehensive intelligence or influence. They know broadly what the Guild is doing, because Guild activities are visible in their effects, but they don't have detailed access to Guild decision-making. This partial blind spot in their intelligence network is one reason the Sisterhood invested so heavily in creating the Kwisatz Haderach. A male with full prescient abilities would be able to see and understand things that even their intelligence network couldn't uncover. The relationship between the Bene Gesserit and the Emperor is particularly complex. The Emperor is officially the most powerful individual in the universe. He commands the Sardaukar, the most feared military force in the Imperium. He grants and revokes fiefs, controlling which houses rule which planets. He mediates disputes between the great houses and enforces imperial law. But his Bene Gesserit truthsayer stands beside his throne. She knows his secrets. She reads everyone who approaches him. She has influence over his decisions that's subtle but real. Emperor Shaddam IV is aware of this dynamic. He's not stupid. He knows his truth-sayer's ultimate loyalty is to the Bene Gesserit, not to him. But he also knows that he needs her abilities. The political environment of the Imperium is so treacherous that ruling without a truth-sayer would be like navigating a minefield blindfolded. So he accepts the compromise, using the Bene Gesserit's services while remaining wary of their ulterior motives. This creates a relationship built on mutual need and mutual suspicion. The Emperor relies on Bene Gesserit abilities, but doesn't fully trust them. The Bene Gesserit provide genuine services to the Emperor, while also pursuing their own agenda. Each side understands what the other is doing, but the arrangement works because the benefits outweigh the risks for both parties. The great houses have similar relationships with their Bene Gesserit concubines and advisors. House Atreides valued Jessica highly. Duke Leto loved her, and while he knew she was Bene Gesserit and knew she reported back to her order, he trusted her counsel and her loyalty to him personally. This was actually unusual. Most nobles maintained a more cynical relationship with their Bene Gesserit companions, using their abilities while never fully trusting them. Jessica earned genuine loyalty from House Atreides through her actions and character, which made her eventual betrayal of Bene Gesserit orders to conceive a son even more significant. She chose House Atreides over the sisterhood, proving that even Bene Gesserit conditioning can be overcome by genuine human connection. The Harkonnens, by contrast, represented a darker use of Bene Gesserit placement. Baron Vladimir Harkonnen had no illusions about his relationship with the Bene Gesserit. He used them cynically, just as they used him. The Bene Gesserit wanted access to Harkonnen genetics for the breeding program. The Baron wanted the advantages that Bene Gesserit-trained concubines provided. It was a transaction, nothing more. This actually made the Baron harder for the sisterhood to manipulate. He never developed emotional attachments that could be exploited. He remained coldly aware of what each party was getting from the arrangement. The Bene Gesserit's intelligence network deserves special attention. Every sister placed in a noble house is essentially a spy. She observes, she listens, she reads people and situations, and she reports back to the mother school. The accumulation of these reports gives the sisterhood a comprehensive understanding of political dynamics across the entire Imperium. They know which houses are strong and which are weak. They know where alliances are forming and where conflicts are brewing. They know the personalities, weaknesses, and secrets of virtually every important political figure. This intelligence isn't gathered through technological means. There are no spy satellites or listening devices, nothing that would violate the prohibition against thinking machines. It's all human intelligence, gathered through observation and conversation, processed through trained minds, and synthesized into actionable understanding. In some ways, this makes it more reliable than technological intelligence would be. Technology can be fooled or defeated, but a trained Bene Gesserit observer with her hyper-awareness and her understanding of human psychology is much harder to deceive. The sisterhood also maintains its own independent wealth and resources. They don't depend on any single patron or source of funding. The fees they charge for training noble daughters provide substantial income. Their sisters placed in noble houses often send monetary support. They have investments and holdings across multiple worlds. This financial independence is crucial to their political independence. They can refuse assignments they don't want. They can pursue goals that don't have immediate payoff. They're not beholden to anyone's agenda but their own. The Mother School on Wallach 9 is the physical center of this quiet empire. It's where sisters are trained, where the breeding program is coordinated, where intelligence is analyzed, and where decisions are made. The Reverend Mother Superior rules from Wallach 9, her authority extending across the galaxy through the network of sisters embedded in every major power structure. The school itself is neutral ground. Even during conflicts between great houses, Wallach 9 remains untouched. To attack it would be to make an enemy of every power that relies on Bene Gesserit services, which is essentially everyone who matters in the Imperium. This neutrality is carefully maintained. The Bene Gesserit avoid taking public sides in conflicts between great houses. They serve all sides, providing concubines and advisors to rival houses simultaneously. This seems like it should create conflicts of interest, and sometimes it does, but the sisterhood manages these tensions through their hierarchical structure and their overriding loyalty to the organization above any individual assignment. A sister serving House Atreides might have different immediate interests than a sister serving House Harkonnen, but both ultimately serve the sisterhood's long-term goals. The question that haunts this entire structure is whether the Bene Gesserit's manipulation is ultimately beneficial or harmful to humanity. They would argue that their guidance has prevented countless wars, that their breeding program is pushing human evolution forward, that their long-term planning is necessary because most humans are too short-sighted to manage their own affairs wisely. There's something to this argument. The Imperium has been relatively stable for thousands of years, and Bene Gesserit influence has probably contributed to that stability. But there's a counter-argument. The Bene Gesserit's manipulation denies people genuine self-determination. They're making decisions for humanity without humanity's consent. They're treating people as pawns in a game that only the sisterhood fully understands, and their certainty that they know what's best for everyone is a form of arrogance that ultimately leads to catastrophic failure when Paul, their own creation, turns against them and unleashes the jihad they wanted to prevent. The Bene Gesserit represent a particular vision of how enlightened elites should relate to the masses. They believe that most people are incapable of making wise, long-term decisions, that humanity needs guidance from those who can see further and understand more deeply. This philosophy has ancient roots in human history. It's Plato's philosopher kings. It's Confucian mandarins. It's the concept of noblesse oblige. The Bene Gesserit are the most sophisticated and powerful expression of this idea. that Frank Herbert could imagine. And by showing both their brilliance and their ultimate failure, he's asking us to question whether such elite manipulation can ever truly serve the common good. The paradox is that the Bene Gesserit are genuinely trying to help humanity. They're not motivated by personal gain or sadistic pleasure in manipulation. They've devoted themselves completely to what they see as humanity's long-term welfare. Yet their methods are deeply problematic. They lie. They manipulate. They treat people as means rather than ends. They've built an entire civilization's power structure on foundations of deception and hidden control. Can noble goals justify such means? The Bene Gesserit say yes. Frank Herbert, through the catastrophic consequences of their plans, suggests the answer might be no. The failure and legacy. So we come to the heart of the matter. After 10,000 years of patient planning, after generations of genetic manipulation, after embedding themselves in every power structure in the known universe, the Bene Gesserit achieve their goal. The Kwisatz Haderach is born. Paul Atreides possesses abilities beyond anything they'd imagined. He can see through time, perceive countless futures, access both male and female genetic memory. He is everything they hoped to create. And he destroys everything they built. Paul's prescient vision shows him that the Bene Gesserit's carefully maintained balance of power is unsustainable. The old Imperium, with its great houses and its subtle manipulations and its pretense of civilization, is actually holding humanity back. The species has become stagnant, comfortable, complacent. What humanity needs is not gentle guidance, but violent upheaval. And despite his own horror at what he sees coming, despite his desire to find another path, Paul unleashes the jihad that will kill billions and spread his influence across the galaxy. This is the Bene Gesserit's ultimate failure. They created a superhuman they couldn't control. They gave him abilities that let him see through all their manipulations. And his prescient vision showed him that their way, the path of subtle, long-term manipulation, wouldn't save humanity from the stagnation that would eventually destroy it. The very success of their breeding program created the conditions for the complete disruption of their carefully planned future. The irony is exquisite. The Bene Gesserit spent 10,000 years trying to prevent exactly the kind of religious fanaticism that Paul's jihad represents. They planted false religions specifically to control and channel religious impulses. They positioned themselves as rational actors above the chaos of genuine faith, and their own creation becomes the center of the most powerful religious movement in human history, a Messiah whose followers kill in his name across thousands of worlds. Jessica's role in this failure is crucial. Her decision to bear a son instead of a daughter was motivated by love. She wanted to give Duke Leto the heir he desired. It was a profoundly human choice, putting personal relationship above abstract duty. But that single moment of human weakness, from the Bene Gesserit perspective, shattered their entire plan. Paul was born a generation early, outside their control structure, raised with loyalty to House Atreides rather than to the sisterhood. Jessica's humanity, Her inability to remain a perfect instrument of Bene Gesserit will introduced the chaos that their rigid planning couldn't accommodate. This raises the fundamental question at the heart of Dune. Can you plan the future? Can you control human destiny through careful manipulation and long-term strategy? The Bene Gesserit believed the answer was yes. They built their entire organization around this belief. But Paul's prescient vision shows that the future is not a single path that can be selected and followed. It's a branching network of possibilities, constantly affected by countless decisions made by countless people. Even with prescient vision, even seeing all possible futures, you can't control which future will actually occur, because the act of trying to reach a specific future changes the probabilities. Paul sees this more clearly than anyone. His prescient vision is both gift and curse. He sees the terrible futures his actions will create. He sees the jihad that will kill billions. He sees the stagnation that will eventually threaten humanity if the jihad doesn't happen. He's trapped by his own knowledge, unable to find a path that avoids horror, because every path he can see leads to horror of one kind or another. This is what the Bene Gesserit never understood. Creating someone with perfect prescient vision doesn't give you control over the future. It just reveals how little control anyone has. The later books in the Dune series explore how the Bene Gesserit adapt to their failure. They don't disappear or lose all influence. They're too embedded in the power structures of civilization for that. But they have to recalibrate their approach. They can't control Paul or his son Leto II. They become one power among many, rather than the hidden hand guiding everything. They continue their work, continue their training and their breeding program and their subtle manipulations, but with the understanding that they're not the only players in the game anymore. Interestingly, they also eventually produce another Kwisatz Haderach in the character of Miles Tegh, a Bene Gesserit creation thousands of years after Paul. This shows that they never abandoned their core mission. They just had to accept that creating superhuman abilities doesn't mean controlling those who possess them. Tegh, like Paul before him, uses his abilities in ways the sisterhood didn't plan and can't fully control. The legacy of the Bene Gesserit in the Dune universe is complex. They represent both human potential taken to extraordinary heights and the dangers of trying to control that potential. Their training methods show what humans can achieve through discipline and dedication. Their abilities are genuine extensions of human capacity, not supernatural powers. A person who can control their body at a cellular level, who can read others with perfect accuracy, who can access genetic memory, is still human. Just a human operating at the absolute peak of what's possible. But they also represent the hubris of thinking you can engineer perfection. Their breeding program treated people as genetic resources. Their missionaria protectiva manipulated entire cultures. Their political influence denied people genuine self-determination. They operated on the assumption that they knew better than everyone else what humanity needed. and that assumption led them to commit acts that in any other context we'd recognize as deeply immoral. Frank Herbert's portrayal of the Bene Gesserit is fascinating because it's neither simple condemnation nor simple admiration. He shows us the genuine good they do, the stability they help maintain, the human potential they unlock. But he also shows us the costs of their methods and the ultimate failure of their grand plan. They're neither villains nor heroes. They're highly capable people pursuing what they genuinely believe is humanity's best interest, using methods that violate fundamental principles of human dignity and freedom. The Bene Gesserit also represent Herbert's thinking about religion, superstition, and rational thought. The sisterhood denies being religious. They insist they're a school, a training organization, nothing more. Yet everything about them is wrapped in ritual and mysticism. They deliberately cultivate an aura of the supernatural, even though their abilities are the result of training and genetics. They understand that humans need mystery, that the appearance of the supernatural gives them power that pure rationality wouldn't provide. This connects to one of Herbert's central themes. Humans are not purely rational beings. We're driven by emotion, by faith, by unconscious desires and fears. The Bene Gesserit understand this and exploit it. They use rational methods to analyze and manipulate the irrational aspects of human nature. They're the ultimate rationalists who have learned to weaponize superstition. This makes them simultaneously more sophisticated than simple true believers and more cynical than honest rationalists. Conclusion: the mirror they hold up. As we come to the end of this exploration, let's consider what the Bene Gesserit reveal about us, about humanity, and our relationship with power, knowledge, and control. Frank Herbert created the sisterhood as a thought experiment. What would happen if you took human potential as far as training and genetics could push it? What if you had an organization that thought in terms of millennia rather than years? What if manipulation became so sophisticated that the manipulators themselves believed they were serving the greater good? The answer Herbert provides is both impressive and cautionary. Yes, you could achieve extraordinary things. You could develop abilities that seem supernatural. You could influence the course of civilizations. You could pursue genuinely long-term goals while others focused on immediate gains. But you couldn't control everything. You couldn't eliminate human agency and choice. And your very success might create the conditions for catastrophic failure. The Bene Gesserit embody a fundamental tension in human nature. We want to believe that reason and planning can solve any problem. We want to believe that if we're just smart enough, patient enough, disciplined enough, we can shape the future we desire. The Bene Gesserit represent this belief taken to its logical extreme, and their failure suggests that no amount of intelligence, no degree of planning, can fully control complex systems like human civilization. Yet we can't dismiss them entirely. The stability of the Imperium over thousands of years suggests that their guidance did prevent some catastrophes. Their training methods unlock genuine human potential. Their long-term thinking provides perspective that short-term focused individuals lack. Perhaps the lesson isn't that their approach was entirely wrong, but that it was incomplete. They understood systems and planning, but underestimated the power of individual choice and genuine human connection. The training, the abilities, the quiet empire they built, all of it reflects something real about human potential and human organization. We may not have Bene Gesserit sisters in our world, but we have institutions that think long-term, elites who believe they should guide the masses, intelligence services that operate in shadows, genetic scientists pushing the boundaries of what's possible. The Bene Gesserit are science fiction, but they're science fiction that illuminates truths about our actual world. When you watch the Dune films or read the novels, pay attention to the Bene Gesserit. They're not just supporting characters or convenient plot devices. They represent Herbert's deep thinking about power, evolution, religion, and human nature. Every scene with a Reverend Mother is layered with meaning. Every demonstration of their abilities is also a demonstration of their philosophy. They're the most thoroughly developed fictional organization in science fiction because Herbert used them to explore ideas that genuinely mattered to him. The Bene Gesserit teach us that knowledge is power, but power without wisdom leads to catastrophe. They show us that human potential is far greater than we usually imagine, but that unleashing that potential has consequences we can't fully predict. They demonstrate that long-term planning is valuable, but that no plan survives contact with human complexity. They reveal that manipulation, even well-intentioned manipulation, ultimately fails because humans resist being treated as objects rather than subjects of their own lives. In the end, the Bene Gesserit are a mirror. They show us our desire for control magnified and made explicit. They show us our belief in reason and planning taken to extremes. They show us what happens when genuine caring for humanity's welfare becomes twisted into justification for any means necessary. And through their magnificent failure, they show us that the universe is larger, stranger, and less controllable than even the wisest humans can fully comprehend. The old woman sitting by the throne, silent and observing. The mother who breaks her conditioning out of love. The sisterhood that plans in terms of millennia, while individual sisters live and die in service of goals they'll never see completed. These are the Bene Gesserit, witches, manipulators, guardians, failures,
and ultimately, some of the most human characters in a story about humans trying to transcend their humanity. Frank Herbert gave us the Bene Gesserit as a gift, a fully realized vision of what we might become if we pushed human potential to its limits while maintaining the flaws and limitations that make us human. They're terrifying in their capabilities and tragic in their ultimate failure. They're brilliant in their methods and blind to their own hubris. They're exactly what happens when you try to engineer perfection and discover that perfection, once achieved, refuses to be controlled. If you've made it this far in our journey through the training halls of Warlock 9, through the political shadows where truth-sayers whisper, through 10,000 years of genetic manipulation and religious engineering, I hope you've gained new appreciation for just how sophisticated Frank Herbert's creation really is. The Bene Gesserit aren't just cool characters with neat abilities. They're a fully thought-through exploration of profound questions about human nature, power, and destiny. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the Bene Gesserit and want to see more explorations of science fiction's most fascinating concepts, please hit that subscribe button. It really helps the channel grow and lets me know what kind of content you want to see. Drop a comment letting me know what aspect of Dune you'd like me to explore next. Should we dive into the Spacing Guild and their navigators? Explore the ecology of Arrakis and the sandworms? Examine the political structure of the Imperium? Let me know what interests you. And if you found this video helpful or interesting, give it a like. It helps other people who might be interested in this kind of deep lore analysis find the content. Until next time, sleep well, and remember, fear is the mind killer. But sometimes the thing we should really fear is those who claim to have conquered fear entirely. The Bene Gesserit mastered their fear, controlled their bodies and minds with perfect discipline, planned for thousands of years with unwavering focus. And despite all that mastery, despite all that control, they still couldn't control the one thing that mattered most: human choice, human love, the stubborn refusal of individuals to be perfect instruments of anyone's grand design. Maybe that's the real lesson of the Bene Gesserit. Not that we should fear witches in the shadows manipulating events, but that we should be wary of anyone, including ourselves, who thinks they know exactly what humanity needs and exactly how to provide it. The universe is too complex, the future too uncertain, and human nature too gloriously messy for any plan, no matter how brilliant or well-intentioned, to work out exactly as designed. Good night.